Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark Allen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyour-ear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a View.
Well, welcome to this. When the Netflix adaptation of One Day came out recently, top 10 in 89 countries, David Nicholls said that one of the most enjoyable parts of the process was making the compilation tape that Emma gives to Dexter, and he's been very involved in the new soundtrack album as well. David, it's lovely to see you.
Really nice to be here.
Where do we find you?
I'm in my office, actually. This is where I hide away each day to write. Yeah, this is my quiet space.
Which David and I thought looked extremely tidy.
Very tidy.
Have you done it just for us?
I have. I've been up since dawn.
Very good. Well, look, we're going to get on to the delicious process of making compilation tapes in a moment. But firstly, can you remember the first record you bought? Actually, no. Can you remember the record playing equipment in your parental home?
Oh, yeah, we had this big old wooden cabinet, which had ornaments on. So we didn't get to use it very often. We had to you had to clear away all kinds of things to actually play the music.
In order to open it.
In order to lift the lid. Yeah. And we had very few albums. We weren't a family of big music lovers. There was the 1812 Overture and a collection of nursery rhymes. And I think the first album I bought was Geoff Love and his orchestra, big space themes, great space themes.
Fantastic. That's very good work. That is. I'm delighted to say that is the first mention. We've done loads of these interviews where people talk about growing up with gramophones, radiograms.
Yeah.
And that is the first time anybody's mentioned the 1812 Overture, which of course is a favourite of every 8-year-old boy, isn't it? Because it's got cannons on it.
It's got cannons, Holst the Planets, because it sounded a bit like Star Wars. And a lot of Geoff Love, because this was the Music for Pleasure label, I think it was called.
Yes.
It was much, much cheaper. And you used to be able to buy in Woolworths on those turning displays. So we didn't have a lot of records. We certainly didn't have anything like the Beatles or even Simon and Garfunkel. It was very much popular classics.
So you were the first people bringing pop music into the home then?
Yeah, yes. No, eventually we got one that didn't have, where there wasn't quite so gargantuan and it was a bit more accessible. And I was the first person to sit there in the living room with headphones on. And I'm embarrassed to remember, but drumsticks as well. I used to drum along on the
very good.
Oh yeah,
the Parkinol recliner. So yeah, I was the first real kind of music fiend in the house, I think. Yeah.
What was the first record you bought? Can you remember?
Well, records seemed so monumentally expensive and special. I think I used to buy a lot of bootleg cassette tapes from the local market because you could get a kind of a knockoff Sgt. Pepper, which sounded terrible. It sounded warbled on cassette. It just
woolly,
absolutely awful.
Yeah.
Well, my Uncle Pat had an amazing record collection, and so I used to listen to his Red and Blue Beatles albums and his Simon and Garfunkel and Roxy Music. I think the first record I bought myself, it was that knockoff of Sgt. Pepper, and this was one of the many Beatles revivals. I was a huge Beatles fan, so that was probably my way in. I'm just trying to think. First single, I think I was also a big prog rock fan at that stage, about 15, 16 years. I really loved all the music from 15 years before, really. I mean, I was
going to say, because you were born in, was it 66, I think? So
66,
all that prog came out, when you were about, I don't know, whatever, sort of 6 or 7, really, didn't it?
No, absolutely. No, it was old music. And I think the music of the time, a lot of new wave and electronic music and two-tone, a lot of my friends were really into two-tone. I was a bit wary of it. I think I liked the sort of slightly, I was quite a pretentious kid. And the kind of literary affectations of prog and Kate Bush and all of those things. That's what I responded to.
Was there a particular drummer that you like to pretend to be with your phantom drumsticks or whatever?
I think my fantasy was always that I'd go to a Genesis concert and Phil Collins would be taken ill or something, and they say, "Does anyone know Firth of Forth or supper's ready?" And I put my hand up. So yeah, very much
with drumsticks.
With my drumsticks. But I was
wheeling on your Parker Knoll recliner.
I was a truly terrible drummer. My left hand was a great deal slower than my right hand, and I wasn't very coordinated. But I did love the music, and I loved Phil Collins drumming, especially on the Peter Gabriel albums, the third Peter Gabriel album. I loved that sound. That was something that I tried to kind of emulate in the music practice room.
Did you suffer from that terrible male thing of trying to work out the time signatures on prog records?
Oh, yeah.
It's just classic, wasn't it? I think you would sort of nod sagely and go, I think this is 1416 or whatever. 1416?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I learned them bar by bar in my head, and I still, every now and then they come up, and I can recall, every single bar of it, really.
That's really, the thing.
There's something about music at that age,
Of course there is. You will never again in your life know anything as well as a piece of music that you got obsessed with at the age of 14. It's completely inside you forevermore.
Yeah. And yet, parallel to this, it's interesting because I also was a big fan of kind of Motown. Again, there was a kind of Motown revival around about that time. And I loved... a lot of, really just compilations rather than albums. But there was something about that music that really moved me as well. I think probably it came out of things like Dexy's Midnight Runners and some of the two-tone songs were those perfect 2-minute pop songs. I like that, but my obsession really, until sort of 17, 18, was prog and Kate Bush, yeah.
Did you join any particular kind of, were there tribes at school, were there particular gangs? Was there a kind of New Romantic and a ska?
They certainly existed, but I kind of was, again, I was very kind of a little bit nervous of all that stuff. I guess I did wear a long coat and scarf, but I never really committed to the hippie thing and the prog thing. I think I sort of skirted around all of that. I'm very kind of wide ranging my tastes, but never really committed to. No, certainly punk seemed terrifying to me.
Right.
How were you? What was your way of discovering music? Was it Radio 1 or was it Top of the Pops or
It was Radio 1, and I remember I was one of those John Peel listeners, and a lot of that music I didn't really get, but I had a membership of the local library, Eastleigh Public Library. Was a major part of my life, and that enabled me to kind of to try out music without investing that huge amount of money in an album. So that's why I first learned to love David Bowie and Joni Mitchell.
So you're borrowing vinyl.
Yeah.
So let's just travel back there because people have forgotten about this. Do you used to have they had stickers on the front of them indicating where there were scratches on the record?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you take them back and they get it out the sleeve and they take a look and then it would go back on the rack. I mean, I don't know what they were meant to do if you had scratches, but I was a massive user of that library and the music library, and not just rock and pop, but classical as well. And I kind of dipped my toe into lots of things that I wouldn't necessarily have been able to afford to buy, like Van Morrison, as I say, and it really widened my I even tried a little bit of jazz. It didn't cost me anything. It was very easy to experiment. So it by no means the same as today's streaming, but it did allow me a certain amount of experimentation. Yeah, and also the radio. I mean, I remember the first great single I bought was. I remember having the 12-inch of Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, which I thought was incredible. I'd never really had a record like that. And I guess it must have been around that time that I also bought the 7-inch of Robert Wyatt's Shipbuilding, which I thought was just exquisite. I thought it was the most beautiful sound and the saddest song, and political and powerful and affecting and beautifully played and produced and a really interesting voice.
Have you still got all that stuff? Have you kept it?
I think my mum's got it up in the attic. Yeah, it's all there.
Are you sure? Are you sure, your mother? Because we do hear sad stories about people saying, "Oh, yeah, wait, Mum, where is? Oh, I threw them away years ago."
No, I don't think she's ever thrown anything away in her life. So I'm sure they're there.
Who was the first group you ever saw? Can you remember?
Well, for my 16th birthday, I remember vividly, my sister bought me tickets to see XTC at the Southampton
That's
Belmont.
a good start,
I loved XTC.
surely.
Very good.
And they cancelled, and then they cancelled.
Oh.
So I didn't get to go. But I went to see with my friends from school a lot of bands like Culture Club and Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran, a lot of new romantic bands, without really ever committing to it. And the first concert that I was
committing to it implies a certain dress code, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's a tea towel involved somewhere.
There's an enormous blouse.
And of course, because I hadn't seen very much, I really did for a long time think Spandau Ballet was the greatest band I'd ever seen in my life. So you're swept away very much by the power of pop music at that age, and I did love those concerts without calling myself ever really a fan. The concert that I was excited to go and see was I saw the Genesis reunion concert at Milton Keynes Bowl. I forget which year. It must have been 1982 or something like that. And we were a long, long way back. And in retrospect, I don't think it was probably a very good concert. Talk were booed off, and it was
that's
yes,
it's appalling now.
I know, really bad taste. I mean, now that I'd go for Talk, and I'd probably skip the Genesis bit, but
absolutely,
at the time, that seemed great to me. I mean, I was very, very affected by that concert, and then I went to Live Aid. I was one of those people.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Whereabouts were you sitting?
I was just in front of the monitors. I wish I was able to sit. Yeah, it was a long day, but I was just in front of the monitors in the main in the center of the pitch. But that was amazing.
And what was the highlights it were for you?
For me, it was definitely Bowie. Yes, that was fantastic. That was exciting. Right. Afterwards, I was leaving the stadium, and I remember, and Kiki Dee, who duetted with Elton John, was sort of heading to her car, and I don't know what I said to her, but I said, "Well done" to Kiki Dee, which is probably very, very, very memorable encounter for her as well as it was, as much as it was for me. I did love U2 actually. U2, that was very
what
exciting.
A drama!
On the day as well.
When Bono disappeared into the photo pit, and everyone and the band played on for about 5 minutes, having no idea what happened. Was he still alive? It was incredible.
After that, I didn't go. When I went to university, I didn't go so much. I went to Bristol, and it was sort of a really exciting time musically in Bristol, and I did go to a few clubs, but I didn't. The high point of my going to gigs was really as a late teenager, 16, 17. I went to pretty much everything.
Well, we should ask you about the whole business of making tapes, because it was such a big thing, wasn't it? And you talked. I just read a little interview with you talking about when the soundtrack record coming out. And you were saying that making tapes, the tapes said the things that you couldn't say. Can you remember? Dave and I are too old actually to have been making tapes for prospective girlfriends.
Yeah, that's true.
Can you remember? They were, however, a kind of a way of broadcasting your personality, weren't they? But how did you go about it?
I think there were several drafts. It wasn't something you rushed into. You thought about it very carefully.
Yeah.
As you say, it was a bit like a Valentine's card. It was a way of saying the things that you were too frightened to express. And there was also that anxiety about, whether or not it would be too esoteric, or whether they wouldn't like it, or whether they'd actually think a little bit less of you if it wasn't their taste.
Yes. But, would it be pretentious?
Would it be pretentious? Exactly. Striking that balance between...
Well, of course it would be pretentious. That's one thing you can guarantee about any tape put together by a bloke. It will be pretentious.
It will be pretentious.
You're showing off.
It was pretentious. But there was a great... I suppose the key thing was the labour involved. You'd have to handwrite this thing with your best fine pen and your best italic script, and you'd have to put you had to do it in real time. So a 90-minute tape is 3 or 4 hours of work. So there's a sort of a trophy element to it as well.
Did you ever listen back to one after you'd done it? Well, obviously you listened back to it before you gave it. And did you then think, do you know, I'll put a track in there that's just too long?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because that's a blokey thing.
No, the pacing of it, yes.
It's Genesis. It's far too long.
Do you think she'll like the drum solo? No, she will never like drum solo.
Yes. I need to write on the cassette tape that it's 13/8. It's in 13/8, and that's the great thing about it. No, I think I think it was definitely the case that there was the minutes were valuable, and you had to think very carefully and make the most of it. And often the tape would run out halfway through a song, and you'd have to decide whether to do the whole thing all over again. Then there was the amazing technical development of tape to tape. So you could kind of make a tape for someone you adored and then do it again for someone else.
Just scratch out the name. She'll never know.
Far more caddish than I was, but it saved a lot of time tape to tape. The double tape deck, yeah, that was a real breakthrough.
You see, you probably never knew the brief glory of the mini disc. The brilliant thing about the mini disc, which was a feature they could never mention in marketing it, was that you could put together a playlist and then delete one and it would shuffle the rest together.
It up, yeah.
It was a brilliant thing for that. But they couldn't market it.
Which you couldn't do with a tape, obviously. If you put something in the middle that you then regretted.
Which you inevitably did.
Yeah, you're then thinking, why does that sounded a bit forward? Or that could be yes, I Want You by Elvis Costello or whatever. Or it would be misunderstood. I'm sure there were absolute agonies involved,
Yeah. No, absolutely. I did invest in the mini disc. I don't think I ever bought an album, but I made a lot of compilations.
All right, well, good.
It was quicker. But then I had a CD burner. That was an extraordinary thing. A massive, huge whirring monster sitting on the desktop. And with that, that was my kind of golden age of compilation making. I used to burn a lot of compilation CDs for friends, and because it was so much quicker and easier, that was great fun. And
can you think of things that were regularly on there?
Yeah, it was sort of things like, I think I was a sort of there was a lot of Nick Drake, a lot of sort of things like Osmitantis. I really like Baby by Osmitantis. That usually found its way on there. They were much more esoteric. They were kind of much more, by then, this is the late 90s. I think my tastes had kind of widened by then. So it was no longer making that big distinction between electronic music and dance music and pop music and rock music. It was all much more diverse. Little bits of classical music and Aphex Twin would find their way in there. They were much more.
It's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? That was a thing shared by loads of people, wasn't it, at that time? And I suppose it goes along with CD burning, doesn't it? You suddenly could get a hold of all kinds of odd music that wasn't necessarily associated with the star name or anything like that. No. It might be instrumental music, might be a movie soundtrack. Suddenly all that stuff became more available to people, didn't it? And people just like putting that stuff together, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And those were good mixes. I'm told that people are still listening to the compilations that I made I made them in conjunction with Hannah, my partner, as well, and we'd sort of share them out with friends. And as you say, we were receiving lots of music from people as well, and hearing lots of wonderful things that were previously unavailable to us. And it was I know that it was quite a tempestuous time in the music industry. I mean, there was a lot of illegal downloading, and this is sort of preempts Spotify and iTunes, and it's sort of the way the CD era faded into streaming. There was this strange period in between.
It's very odd, isn't it? You didn't go so far with your CDs. I'm trying to remember what it was even called, but I used to do this. You could print a label for a CD and stick it on the.
That's right.
You?
Oh yeah, we did all of that. we did all of that. Hannah was much better at that than I was, but we definitely had the labels.
Wow. You tell the kids of today that they will believe.
No idea. I think it's a plate or coaster for their glass or something.
We used to literally make our own entertainment.
We did.
That's fantastic. So tell us about the part that this plays in One Day and the filmification of that.
Yeah.
There's a tape that Emma makes. It was in 1989 she makes it, isn't that right? I'm trying to remember.
Yes. There's a chapter in the novel which is they've both they're leading separate lives. He's with his family now, and he's feeling a little. He has a night alone and with his newborn baby, and goes through some boxes and finds the old compilation tape, and it inevitably leads him to give her a call and to become a little bit nostalgic about the first time they meet. So it's a little kind of callback, I suppose, to their first encounter. A lot of the book is about planting a seed in 1988 that pays off in 2003 and that kind of thing. And music is part of that, really. And so in the novel, when I was writing the novel, I very much had separate playlists. Literal playlists. I think they're actually on Spotify still of the music that Dexter likes, which is a lot of kind of dance music and big beat and kind of Brit pop, and the music that Emma likes, which is a little bit more wide ranging and a little bit more singer-songwriter and indie music and classical music. And those were very much, for me, part of sketching out the characters and working out who they were.
I was going to say, did you choose those to telegraph a particular time, or was it about an expression of the kind of people they were?
I think it's an expression of character. It's one of the first things I do. It's a little bit like an actor deciding what their characters' clothes and music and food tastes are. You need to. Music is an expression of character, and that's what those mixtapes were doing. They were saying, "This is who I am. This is my attitude to life. This is my energy." It's a way of self-expression. Even if you're not a musician, you can choose music and present it to people.
What kind of things did you put on for Emma, for example, that got
Emma,
across who she was?
Emma is much more kind of wide-ranging. So there was a lot of Scritti Politti and Prefab Sprout, but also Public Enemy and more hard-edged music and political music. And probably her tastes were a little bit closer to my taste. There was a lot of Smiths and Joni Mitchell and those kind of things, and some 60s music as well, the Kinks and some Beatles and Nina Simone. And again, she's sort of doing what I guess all of us were doing in that compilation tape period of trying to communicate something to Dexter. This is how she felt about him in 1989, not how she feels about him when he rediscovers the tape. But it's very interesting then putting it in the drama series because, of course, the chapter and the episode is about someone being nostalgic. And yet the action of the story is again, sometime in the past. This is something that takes place, I think, in 2003 in the novel. So it's nostalgia on nostalgia, if you like. And when we were choosing the songs for, the Emma's the mixtape that Emma makes for Dexter, I did on Spotify, and of course I couldn't stick to the 20 songs which you can plausibly get on a cassette tape. So I think it's up to about 90 songs. But it's a very long mixtape. But again, it was a way of trying to get in the whole range of her tastes, the Tom Waits element and the dance music element and the Motown element and all of those things, the soul music she likes. And when we came to do the show, we had to do all of the research into the rights and the costs of that before we made the episode. Yeah,
I bet.
Yes,
you must have gone in there like the average writer thinking, let's have the Beatles.
Yes, that's right.
They go, no, I think you'll find.
Didn't they always say that with Train Spotting, that Lust for Life by Iggy Pop used up, was it 80% of the budget, Dave, wasn't it? 80% of the music budget.
Yeah. Probably.
But my God, they got their money's worth.
They definitely did.
That's an extraordinary moment.
I work with the music is really the responsibility of a great music coordinator called Matt Biffer, who does a lot of great TV shows, whose name I noted on the credits of I May Destroy You, which I thought had a fantastic score, a fantastic soundtrack. And so I was delighted to work with Matt, and we had great fun doing it, not just the mixtape episode, but throughout the show. working out music, not just from that year, but the music from the past, which they might be listening to in that year.
That's the interesting thing. Because there's an actual CD, isn't there? If we can talk about something as old-fashioned as that. Yes?
Yeah. There's a double album coming out of some of the tracks. There's lots of tracks.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And it struck me, I was looking at the list.
All the time, aren't they?
You've got things, you've got Nick Drake on there.
Nick Drake.
You got Joan Armatrading, is it Love and Affection
Love
is
and
on
Affection.
there?
Nico's These Days is on there, isn't it? So that's stuff that they would have been listening to in 1989 from the past, presumably.
I mean, I feel this very strongly in productions when I watch them, which is in the same way that we don't wear clothes from the year in which
of course.
we wear clothes that are, 5, 10, 15, 20 years old. And the same applies to music. And for me, the sound of 1985 is Joan Armatrading, which is from 8 years before. So similarly, when we wanted to suggest, there's one episode where they go to Greece on holiday, and it corresponds to the kind of the beginning of Ibiza and house music and all of that. We used Black Gold of the Sun, which is again a 70s track. It's not from 1991 when the episode takes place. It's from some years before. So sometimes the old music of a year can capture a year better than the music that's in the charts at that time.
Yeah.
And I think we did cheat a little bit at some points. I mean, for instance, in the 4th episode, which takes place in 1991, they're listening to, there's a Karen Dalton song, and I think Karen Dalton wasn't really rediscovered until much, much later, even though the music is much, much earlier. So sometimes you have to slightly bend the rules.
That is very complex, isn't it? It's really true.
Really is.
Long dead, obscure, then known. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Briefly.
Yes.
That's the strange afterlife of pop music nowadays, isn't it? It's really extraordinary. So you enjoyed putting it together?
I loved it. Yeah, I mean, what you get a rough cut which you can watch on your computer at home, and you have this wonderful opportunity to loop the scene and loop where the music might go, and just go through your favorite songs. And then, as you say, you take in your top 10 favorites which you think might work over the image, and immediately 5 of them get crossed out because it's the Beatles or someone who doesn't give permission, and that's frustrating. But often it forces you into unexpected choices.
Yeah, no, sure. I always feel sorry for actors in dance sequences on TV dramas, because I know they're dancing to total silence because nobody knows what the music is going to be.
They've been told what time signature to dance in. They're going
not
to have to
even
find
sure
something.
of that.
Not even sure that's true.
They just shuffle back and forth. They can just hear their feet.
Yes, no, there's definitely a lot of there's a lot of click track dancing, and in some of the episodes we didn't choose the music till much later.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
It is.
So what else have you got coming up? What are you working on?
Well, I'm back in novel writing land at the moment. I mean, I'm publicizing the last novel, which is called You Are Here, which also has a sort of musical set piece in it. It's there's a section. You Are Here is a love story that takes place on a long walk, and there's a chapter where they run out of conversation, and so they decide to shuffle each other's music collections. Not listen to a compilation, not the greatest hits, but just everything that's there, good and bad, just to get a kind of just a peek inside.
What a chilling thought! Oh my God,
it really is. You could go off somebody very quickly indeed.
Exactly. And the rule is they have to listen to all of the track, and they're not allowed to skip. And so that was fun to write, because I very much chose music that isn't music I love. It's music that might shuffle up, and you
give us an example of some of the tracks that proved challenging for the other person.
Well, they have a long conversation about Don't Speak by No Doubt, isn't it? Yes, which actually is a fun song. But and I think Two Unlimited's No Limits comes up as well, and that causes a bit of a stir. So they're not, and El Condor Pasa, which is not my favorite Simon & Garfunkel song by a long way. So all of these songs give the characters an opportunity to kind of tell jokes and tell stories and riff and remember. And it was a really fun chapter to write because if you know who the characters are, you can do it with pretty much any song. And I did spend a long time just shuffling and seeing what they might talk and laugh about.
It's funny, isn't it, that people when they're listening to old music that pops up randomly like that, they tend to say one of two things, which is either, oh, I love this, or, oh, this is so embarrassing.
Yes, what was I thinking?
It's like there's nothing in between. and all it indicates is how intimately connected with music we are.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks reading an old book is embarrassing at all. Whereas
no, absolutely.
Music, that's broadly a male thing, though, probably, isn't it?
I don't think it is entirely. I know what you mean. Yeah,
Dave and I used to notice that when we worked in offices, that if you put some music on, that women would often say, "Oh, this is nice. What is it?" But men would always say, "What is this?" And wait till they were told before they said that it was nice.
Decide whether or not
it could be some terrible bear pit that they would be falling into and make them look ridiculous,
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, that's great. So when's this CD coming out?
I think in October, and it will be on vinyl. And it's
the CD's on vinyl.
Yeah, it's very retro. It's by no means all of the tracks, but it's a great selection of them. And yes, it would. I don't know how many albums we'd fill with all of the tracks because there are a lot of songs in every episode. But there's some really great things there. And it was really, really fun to do. It's one of my favorite parts of the process.
No, sure.
Well, it's fantastic how it's kept one day going. Because when did it come out? 2009, I think. 15 years ago, and it's just sustained it, hasn't it? The soundtrack album, and then there was the film, and now there's this, and it's wonderful.
I think this will be it for a while now. I think I don't think there's going to be another version in my lifetime. But
that's what Paul McCartney said years ago.
But this has been a really lovely experience. I loved the team. I loved the actors and the writers, and I was involved, but also with a certain amount of distance as well, so it's the perfect combination, really.
Yeah, you go to the pub.
I saw the cuts, but not all of the cuts. I got involved, but not with everything. It was perfect.
Oh well, very interesting. Very interesting. So, what do you keep up with music? I mean, do you go to gigs and so forth?
I do, yes, occasionally, very occasionally. But my kids keep me educated. They love. My son in particular loves live music. He loves clubs. He's a big house music fan.
What does he listen to?
House music. I wouldn't be able to tell you.
No, this is it.
don't know the names. Yeah,
we're in the same boat here.
Yes,
but actually, even if you told us, we would just be nodding sagely, going, "Oh yeah, right, amazing."
He listens. He thinks of it. I think more in terms of sound of genres and movements.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's true.
Than actual bands and artists, and so. So last night we were listening to Joy Orbison. That's who we were listening to, Joy Orbison. And I was having to explain where the name came from. It was a little joke.
Oh my goodness!
How to explain the pun to my son.
How to explain Roy Orbison to a Martian? That's I once had to explain. I was once in Ethiopia, and we had a guide translator who had never heard of Elvis Presley. Spoke really good English. Now try explaining Elvis Presley to a person.
Presumably you just did an impersonation of him, Dave.
You can't do it. You can't do it. He knew Michael Jackson and then James Brown and the Beatles, not Elvis Presley.
Well, it's 80% about a haircut, which is hard to communicate, really.
It is, really.
Yes, and hips.
So the way we usually finish these chats is asking people to tell us what is the greatest record ever made? And I feel sure you'll have views on this subject.
Oh,
if not the correct answer.
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot because I just did, very excitingly, I just did Desert Island Discs.
Oh, what?
Massive thrill for me. So
I heard it was very good.
I don't think it's the greatest record ever made, but I think it is my favorite just for its the skill of the composition, the musicianship, and the voice, particularly the voice, is I Say a Little Prayer. That always really lifts my soul. I just think it's exquisite. There's a bit at the end where it seems it's going to fade out, and then the vocal bursts back in, and there's so much joy in it, and the sense of people in the room playing music, and so that's something I reach for all the time. I love it.
Can't go wrong with that.
You can't.
Can't
That's
go
a
wrong with
very
that.
strong response.
Absolutely. if not the correct answer, I think
That may well be.
That's as near to the correct
well,
answer as
we
we've
often
ever
say,
had.
what's your favourite record? But we know the right answer, but I'm not sure.
Have you ever
No.
revealed what you think is the right
No.
answer?
Well, Dave's is a good one, which is You Never Can Tell by Chuck Berry, which is very hard to argue with, really.
Yeah. I mean, I'm immediately rethinking my answer now.
No, don't do that.
No, it's a very solid one.
That's
And
very good.
you've done well.
Okay.
You've given a good account of yourself.
Yeah.
Brilliant to see you.
Lovely to talk to you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good.
Good luck with it all.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a View.